The first rule of burden. The rules of burden have no final number, no end to count, as the burdens of man are infinite. The land stretched out from the south to the north, fractured by bands of ash that had long since stained the stone. Granite, sandstone, limestone, cleaved and shattered by both fire and cataclysm, the continent was worn and leveled by wind and sun, weathered when there was weather. Raindrops as rare as a square inch of earth not ruptured and altered by force and flame. The sky was clear, cloudless. The soft sky blue of early morning granted the barren earth a cool tone. Shadows still stretched where chasms and gullies crossed east and west. The sky, as well as the earth, was silent. A slight breeze rose up from the east. The sun rose with the habitual regularity of all celestial bodies until it reached high noon, a blanched disk that washed the land of any remaining shadows. Mr. Clark staggered from under a tongue of limestone, leaning over the pathway to and from the Click Farm. The curved pillar had been a stone arch over a well-worn path. From the years Mr. Clark passed under that arch, as a boy, a young man, and now an old man, the arch was as familiar as his own arms and legs. One morning he came upon the arch as it had collapsed during the night, leaving a column leaning over the pathway and a row of broken stones. As a strong back, Mr. Clark moved heavy things at the Click Farm. It was his work. He had no opinion of the work, whether he enjoyed it or loathed it, if it gave him great pain, or if there was reason for the work he was given. There was food and shelter, and the most important thing, a tomorrow. Whatever else he might desire from his days or his work was unimportant. Such was the work of a beast of burden who knew no better, knew no different. As a strong back, if there were heavy things to lift, Mr. Clark was selected to lift them. On his way to the Click Farm, it was his work to clear the path. As often the path was partially or completely blocked from the rocks and debris fallen from cliffs and canyon walls. The path to the Click Farm was a hazard of eroded ruts, cuts, and sheer stone walls, as if the earth was falling into itself. There was always a rock slide or a dead tree falling into the path. One left for the Click Farm just as the sun rose, and arrived just as the sun set. There was no green growth or restful shade other than what the sun created with rock walls and large stones. With care, Mr. Clark pushed, lifted, and rolled the stones clear of the path. There was no anticipation or fear whether the remaining part of the arch could fall on Mr. Clark's head. It wasn't his burden to worry if a rock crushed his skull, but his daily burden to clear the path as was needed of him. Mr. Clark looked up at the broken arch. His arms hurt, his legs aching. He was short of breath. He had walked this far on his own, the archway a halfway point between the compound and the Click Farm. The sun was well beyond noon, the afternoon sun casting shreds of shadows from the shreds of stone, the path itself heated under that sun. The sun reflected up from the smooth path, heating his face. His sight blurred. He staggered a bit more before finding a stone to rest upon. He was silent in confusion. This had never happened before, this weakness. He went to sleep the previous night with a nagging headache. The headaches came and went, but recently with more frequency, remaining longer. He woke late, in pain, rushing as he could through the compound to the staging area to meet his group. They had left already. He walked as fast as he could to catch up, keeping a tenuous balance between his effort and preserving his energy. Now, at the halfway point, the broken arch, he had no more energy to keep going. Here he was, staring at the ground to shade his eyes, his mind growing dull, his sight dimmed, his breathing shallow as he struggled to maintain himself. Among the many rules a man lived by, few were as cold and hard to accept. A man's burdens were infinite. Where a man had no burdens, there was no man left to be burdened. The 20th rule of burden. From the dirt they come forth, and to the dirt they shall return. The 100th rule of burden. To regulate is life, therefore the regulator is the life-giver. The 13th rule of burden. None shall possess what no other can possess. I am rich. Fool, you know the rules, you know what they say, you know the consequences of breaking them, these rules. But still, I am rich. Moeller hunched over his discovery, threatened by his own greed, threatened by the prospect of suddenly being a better man than all the men around him. How dare he? There were no better men, no other creature lower in the dirt than those souls living in the catacombs. The administrators were only a notch above the common rabble of the catacombs, and were tasked with keeping every soul under their authority in the mud. What Moeller held in his hands wasn't the greatest violation of any of the rules of burden, but enough of a violation to cause him to hide his prize. Capital crimes were listed only for the administrators to see, crimes for which only a handful of men had been disposed of. To know a capital crime was to have committed it. It was just an insect in Moeller's grasp, no capital crime, no more significant than the worms in the dirt. That's what he could say if caught. I saved it from being crushed. I saved it from the darkness. Honest, sir, I was going to hand it over. Honest, as I am living. Moeller lost his footing and slipped on the damp earth. His hands lashed out where he could catch himself from a fall. The insect dropped from his grasp and landed on a rock, furious to escape. The violation of any one of the rules of burden was no lesser or greater than any other violation. The least violation, the violation of being lazy and idle, no lesser a violation than the prime unforgivable sin of murder. It was the administrator's prerogative to end the life of a member of the catacombs. Moeller spotted where the bug had escaped, under a flat stone. He lifted the stone, the insect rushing away towards another stone. It was just a bug, an insect, a bulging, segmented body lumbering in the dark, the long legs scrambling to get away the moment Moeller discovered the little beast's hiding spot. The insect was a prize. Of all the souls in the catacombs who could lay claim to such a prize, this was a discovery of some merit, a once-in-a-lifetime event in a man's life to hold in his hands such immeasurable wealth. It was such a big deal that he could be beaten to death over it, or sent to the click farm. If caught, the violation was so grave that it was the obligation of every soul in the catacombs to deal justice to Moeller. The same consequence for idleness and sloth. For what he had in his hands, he could be thrown into the chasm under the catacombs, smashed against the rocks, and drowned in the water the great well drew from. Moeller had nothing in his rags of clothes to contain the insect. There were so many ways the insect could be killed or damaged if he stashed the bug under his shirt or in his pockets. What few pockets he had that hadn't been eaten through with holes. Moeller made sure to take extreme care. Of the violations of the rules of burden he was perpetrating, being responsible for the death of an insect, intentional or otherwise, demanded immediate consequence. Moeller might beg for forgiveness and be granted stay, to be banished to the click farm. He would live. To crush an insect, to kill it, was a paramount crime. You better take care. To possess an insect was a violation. To injure or kill the insect was a compounded violation, a sin upon sins. Moeller looked over his shoulder, hearing the gritty shuffle of bare feet down a length of intersecting tunnel. It was best that he was in a part of the southern catacombs few visited. There was little cause to populate the southern catacombs, the lowest point of the greater compound, made damp and cold from condensation, the ground treacherous with mud and sharp stones. His discovery would not be spotted. Not that he had to worry about spies. Few residents in the catacombs were concerned with what else another soul was doing. There were few guards and fewer members of the administrators, faceless beings one assumed as rulers over men, managers of the rules of burden and dispensaries of justice upon a man's violation of those rules. Who would see him? To be bothered with too much secrecy over his discovery might add to his chances of being caught. Still, finding a bug was a big deal, big enough that word would get around. The worry meant nothing if he didn't catch it. He followed its crawl along the wall, minding ruts and deep crevices the bug could escape down into. Muller drew enough courage to simply pluck the bug with his bare hands. He angled his attack as best he could to avoid accidental crushing. This was not fear of death for killing the insect. There was no means for the insect to report Muller to the authorities. He had to protect this item of great wealth. Muller was dumbfounded upon capturing the bug, uncertain what to do with a creature determined to escape. With no jar or box or bowl to hold the bug, Muller just cupped his hands together and hoped the bug wasn't carnivorous.